Jonathan Schick back with you for another episode of Shtisel Man. I'm not sure this video is going to get as many views as my previous one about sex and Shtisel, but I believe this is very much related and very, very important in understanding not just things in this show, but things in life in general, and especially as it applies to religious lifestyles. So we're looking at season 1, episode 11, and we're looking at the dynamic of Lippe and Gitti and Ruchami, and I want to focus in on some dialogue that takes place between Lippe and Ruchami towards the end of the episode. So Lippe tries to make overtures to Ruchami, and Ruchami shows the sign that she made to say that he was a Poshe Yisrael, he was a sinner among the people of Israel. And of course, this is devastating for Lippe, but they finally have a conversation. And towards the end of the conversation, Lippe says, there's sometimes I just want to be alone, where nobody knows me and I don't know anybody. And I think what that dialogue is saying, what Lippe is trying to say is, I think he's overwhelmed with shame and guilt. It's compounded by the fact that Gitti doesn't really want to ever talk about it. And as you can see earlier in the episode, when she beats up the woman in the clothing store, calling her a shiksa, you can see she's got tremendous rage about Lippe abandoning the family and going off and to do whatever dastardly deeds he did in a foreign country. But focusing more on Lippe, so he's quashed by he can't discuss his pain and his guilt with his own wife. And although Gitti's intentions might have been good, still in all, it's very, very suffocating for Lippe. And his own daughter is going against him. So he's like bombarded on all sides. But the biggest bombardment is really from in himself, internally. He is just racked with shame and guilt. He doesn't know how to deal with it. He obviously went far away from his religious lifestyle on this trip. And by the way, this is not a far-fetched plot device. There are people who do go abroad for kosher supervision and, ritual slaughtering and whatnot of animals for kosher purposes. And it's very tempting when one is away from the quote-unquote restrictions of a Hasidic or very religious or Haredi lifestyle to sort of let their hair down. But Lippe really let his hair down, from what we can tell, and was almost ready to abandon it all. But he comes back so his kids can have a father and his wife can have a husband. But the shame and guilt is penetrating him. And we'll see how it develops over the next seasons. But for now, the point that I want to make is that shame and guilt for sins and whatnot is not healthy. No, true, everyone, you need to regret. And there is a concept of repentance and tshuva, as it's called in Hebrew, to return to God. That's extremely important. But in the vein of regret and not in the vein of shame and guilt. Shame and guilt has a paradoxical effect on one's ability to grow and to try to do teshuvah. One of the best examples I've ever heard about from a great spiritual leader, rabbi. Years ago, I heard that he said, if a drunk sees another drunk on the street wallowing in his vomit, so you would think the drunk would look at that and say, oh my gosh, look how awful it is when you get so intoxicated and lose yourself in your own vomit. But the brilliant point the rabbi made was that actually, in a, again, paradoxical way, seeing the vomit, so this drunkard says, wow, you must have had some really, really good booze to be able to have such a response to that, and to have such an effect. And so it's in a weird sort of way going back and reviewing one's sins and constantly destroying oneself, and through this penance is actually very, very deadening and very self-defeating. It just gets you back to the same place, and it gets you back there and continue to get you back there. And inevitably, you're going to start thinking about it more. Whether it be any type of these type of sins, sexuality, addictions, and whatnot, it's going to get you back to that same place. And invariably, it could just bring that desire back. So instead of the shame and guilt response, the response of regret and moving on, and not labeling oneself, not saying, I am a sinner, I am a adulterer, right? Which is essentially what Lippe is thinking about himself. I am a person who abandons their family. All these are statements that are saying that he is this individual that he described. Instead, he could say, I am a imperfect human being. And sometimes I will fail, and sometimes I will fall. But, and not to just wash over one's sins, and not to just say, okay, like whatever, let's eat, drink, for tomorrow we may die type of thing, but instead to be serious about one's lifestyle. The religious lifestyle has many, many advantages in living it, but it does have a lot of pitfalls if one is not careful. And one of the major pitfalls is this concept. When shame and guilt becomes the overarching player in one's psyche, then invariably one will not be able to recover and return in the proper manner. Instead of labeling, instead of wallowing in the guilt, instead of a hamster wheel in your brain, instead doing that appropriate regret, but moving on and looking at the present as the present and the past as the past, and the future is just an opportunity. Now, this might be cliche, but the fact of the matter is, and there's so much more to say about this, but the fact of the matter is that this is a much healthier approach to sins and their aftermath than when a person like a Lippe beats himself up to a point where he becomes so much less of what he could be. And this is a message that I believe, at least indirectly, is shown, and is what Lippe means when he says he just wants to be alone and nobody knows him. It's a absolute level of shame to a very, very, very deep level. We should all be able to recognize the differences between shame and guilt and regret, and not labeling, and being able to look proudly at our good deeds, understand that we will, that's part of life. You make mistakes, and not to gloss over them, but also not to overly dwell on them. I hope this message resonates, and love to hear your comments. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll be back with more. Next episode will be the last episode of season 1. Thanks so much. Take care.